to the truth for Canadians. And that is why we are calling for the Auditor General to conduct a performance audit where the government cannot hide anything. This government will continue to try and shift blame off themselves onto the bureaucrats, but it is their signatures that are on the answers to the order paper questions, and it is their responsibility to ensure that the information they are releasing is correct. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
We're going to do questions and comments after question period. At this point, it's time for statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Nepean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canada represents Canada's space innovators and allied industries to convey the value of space technology, research, investment, and results to domestic and international audiences, and to position Canada at the forefront of the highly strategic global new space economy. From vibrant startups to large global companies, Space Canada members are designing, building, and implementing innovative new solutions on and around our planet, from launch to space-based communications, space exploration, environmental monitoring, and Earth observation, among many other applications. They employ thousands of highly qualified people across Canada and contribute $2.5 billion to Canada's GDP. I support Space Canada, which is calling the federal government to create a National Space Council to be chaired by the Prime Minister to guide space policies and investments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And thank you. Just a second. The honourable member for Red Deer-Lacombe.
Madam Speaker, it's my pleasure to stand in the House today to celebrate the recent achievements of Blind Man Brewery, located in my hometown of Lacombe. Blind Man was named the Best Brewery of the Year in Alberta and recognized Best in Show for its 24-2 Brett Stock Ale at the Alberta Craft Brewing Convention. It's satisfying to see that the hard work of risk-taking and ambitious small business entrepreneurs is being rewarded, because small business is the backbone of our local economies. Blind Man is known for creating innovative, community-focused craft beer. They are the first Canadian brewery to document and tell the story of its beer's production. Every can is customized and tells the journey of each beer right back to the field where the grain was grown. I personally enjoy the Five of Diamonds Pilsner, based on the signature Five of Diamonds Len Thompson spoon. A portion of the proceeds is used to enhance local fishing opportunities. Fishing and beer, it doesn't get much more Canadian than that, Madam Speaker. I encourage everyone to stop by and experience the Blind Man Tap Room the next time they travel to Central Alberta. Once again, I congratulate Blind Man Brewing for their award-winning craft beer and wish them every future success. Cheers.
The honourable member for Toronto-Danforth.
Madam Speaker, our Toronto-Danforth community is shining a little bit brighter this week as we mourn the loss of Lillian Adamakis. She was also known as Diamond Lil. People described her as a force of nature. She exuded brilliance. She was magnetizing. She was someone who was an amazing force. She made our community a better place, and we all will miss her deeply. She was a real estate agent who introduced so many people to our beautiful neck of the woods in the East End. She was a glue to us. She supported many community organizations like the Hunger Project, Riverdale Share. Why can't I say Riverdale Share, and our silent auctions for our schools. She was a lovely person. Rest in peace, Lillian. We miss you dearly.
L'honorable député de Drummond.
The honourable member for Drummond. Madam Speaker, the curtain has fallen on the Quebec Cinema Gala. Very recently, we saw its last appearance on Radio-Canada. And this is a very sad decision and very ill-advised. Of course, it's not up to this parliament to decide on public television programming, and I'm not here to tell decision makers at the CBC what they should have on the air or not. But I am concerned, as a film lover, proud of our nation's cinema, I'm worried that this is a window closing. And I'm worried that our talented creators will no longer be recognized. I'm worried that we are detaching from our culture. This gala was an extraordinary showcase that the Société Radio-Canada is turning its back on without regard for our artists, our cinema, our cultural milieu. When something's not working, well, we have to fix it and improve it, not destroy it. This is an unfortunate decision, but it is not too late to change our mind. Quebec cinema deserves better.
L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Sherbrooke.
Honorable député de Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Madam Speaker, I rise to recognize the remarkable career of outgoing Mayor Ken Christian on his last day as Mayor of Kamloops. Mayor Christian's public life began 29 years ago. Back then, Kamloops was preparing to host the Canada Summer Games. The population was much lower, and this face hadn't yet seen a razor. Ken began his career on the Kamloops Thompson School Board. After serving 18 years, he was elected to City Council in 2011, followed by his election to mayor in 2017. On a personal level, I will miss our tradition of taking a selfie at local events. Ken was extremely welcoming to me in my new role as MP, and I am grateful for all he taught me. Mayor Christian, you have left big shoes for Mayor-elect Hamer Jackson. Thank you for your service. I wish you, Brenda, Nick, John, Taryn, and your grandson all the best in your well-earned retirement. Thank you.
The honourable member for Humber River, Black Creek.
Mr. Speaker, we learned very early on in the COVID pandemic that masks save lives. As demand for life-saving masks spiked, we also learned valuable lessons about Canada's supply chain for personal protective equipment. When COVID hit, we were not manufacturing medical-grade respirators in Canada, which were badly needed to protect our medical staff and essential workers. As Canadians do when faced with a challenge, we all got to work. Today, I want to thank 3M Canada and their employees for their incredible commitment to Canadians' health and well-being. During the heart of the pandemic, 3M Canada, with support from our government and the province of Ontario, were able to increase the domestic manufacturing of critical N95 respirators manufactured right here in Brockville, Ontario. They continue to supply those masks today. By manufacturing N95s here, 3M Canada has demonstrated true dedication to our country, to our frontline healthcare workers and essential workers, to our economy, supporting good jobs across the country, and today I want to thank 3M and their employees for that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Canada Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, every Saturday in neighbourhoods in Canada and around the world, runners, walkers, and joggers alike participate in Park Run, a free 5-kilometre community event for people of all ages, abilities, and fitness levels. Park runs are volunteer-led, free to join, and open to all. Since 2004, park runs have been held around the world, and park runners often participate in local park runs while on vacation, meeting locals and creating a truly worldwide park run community. This year, I am proud to congratulate Park Run Canada on its 5th anniversary. Over the last 5 years, community volunteers like Linda Newton have been instrumental in organizing over 150 park runs every Saturday morning around the Beaver Pond. I want to take this opportunity to thank Linda and all of the weekly heroes who help make Park Run a popular activity in my riding of Canada Carleton. Thank you for promoting a healthy, active lifestyle in our Canada community every weekend. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Chatham, Kent Leamington.
Last night was Halloween, Mr. Speaker. But for too many Canadian families, what's scary is a trip to the grocery store. When Canadians talk about bread and butter issues, they talk about bread being up 17% and butter being up 14% in the past year alone. Even the treat bags apple this year is up 17% with record-smashing uptake at Canada's food banks across the country. Why? Because farmers' costs are going through the roof. Yet while Canadians are already struggling to feed themselves, the Liberal NDP coalition will triple the carbon tax while adding fertilizer mandates. A Conservative government will repeal these and get out of our farmers' way so that we can produce our own affordable food. This government's high energy taxes and proposed fertilizer restrictions will only drive food production abroad and undermine Canada's food security. Didn't we learn how irresponsible it was to rely on others from our COVID experience? Canadians can't afford this costly coalition between the NDP and Liberal government. Trick or treat, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député de Sherbrooke.
The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This fall, Sherbrooke Inopol was once again ranked in the top 20 economic development agencies in Canada by Site Selection magazine. I would like to highlight the leadership of Sylvain Durocher and his entire team. It is thanks to organizations like Sherbrooke Inopol that our community is enjoying strong growth in private sector investment. In the last year, many companies supported by our government have significantly invested to increase their production and productivity, like Café William, Faro, La Montagne Chocolates, Royer, Motrec, and so on. Our government is pursuing its commitment to investing in our businesses so that they can increase their competitiveness and growth in an uncertain world. Let's continue to support our businesses and communities across the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Charlottetown.
Mr. Speaker, next week, November 6 to 12, is Medical Radiation Technology Week in Canada. If you don't know MRTs by name, you certainly know them by their actions and their impact in the healthcare system. MRTs are the essential frontline healthcare professionals who, together, perform more than 30 million diagnostic imaging exams like CT scans, MRIs, mammograms, and X-rays, and deliver tens of thousands of courses of life-saving radiation therapy each year in Canada. MRTs provide the essential link between compassionate care and the sophisticated medical imaging and therapeutic technologies that underpin modern healthcare. In diagnostic imaging departments, cancer centers, emergency and operating rooms, and clinics across the country, there are currently more than 22,000 MRTs. Today, I invite the House to join me in recognizing the expertise and dedication of MRTs who provide essential care to Canadians every day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Brandon Souris.
As energy prices skyrocket, inflation is going through the roof, and families continue to struggle to afford groceries, this Liberal government is fixated on raising taxes. The Liberals are the only government in the G7 to raise taxes on energy, and they are tripling down on their carbon tax. Canadians cannot afford higher taxes. A poll released yesterday said 44% of households are concerned about not having enough money to make ends meet. While seniors and families are struggling, it's no wonder why people are furious to find out the Prime Minister spent $6,000 a night on a lavish hotel room. This out-of-touch government needs to make sure Canadians and Canadian families are their number one priority. The Liberals have no plan to get inflation under control. They have no plan to get spending under control and no plan to provide meaningful tax relief. On this side of the House, we will continue to put Canadians first and protect their paychecks and savings, so they don't have to choose between paying their heating bill or their grocery bill this winter.
The Honourable Member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The cost of this NDP Liberal coalition is coming to a head, and it's Canadians who are left with the bill. This Prime Minister, he has added more to the national debt than all previous Prime Ministers combined. And the road to this record is littered with wasteful spending. Whether it's the inflated costs of the Arrive scam app, luxury suites for the Prime Minister and his delegation to London, CERB checks to prisoners, government contracts for Liberal insiders like Frank Baylis, or the $500 million WE scandal. Wasteful spending is fanning inflation, which is already, Mr. Speaker, at a 40-year high. The Bank of Canada hiked interest rates again last week, with more to come. Higher taxes and more inflationary spending is not the answer. Mr. Speaker, you'll forgive me, but I think most Canadians would agree that it's time that we had a Prime Minister who actually thought about monetary policy.
Here, here.
L'honorable député d'Argenteuil, la Petite Nation.
The Honourable Member for Argenteuil, la Petite Nation. Mr. Speaker, it is with great pleasure that I rise today to recognize the winners of the 26th Excelor Gala that the Gatineau Chamber of Commerce held last Saturday night. The evening was a success and allowed us to highlight the efforts of all of the entrepreneurs and employees in the region who have distinguished themselves over the past year. But moreover, Mr. Speaker, I couldn't have asked for anything better than to see my own brother, Marc Lauzon, named Personality of the Year for 2022. His company is in the riding of Gatineau, not Argenteuil-la-Petite-Nation, but my pride goes far beyond its borders. I am proud of his company, proud of the economic development he brings to our region, proud of the dozens of employees who work for the company's success, but above all, Mr. Speaker, proud of my big brother. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Yesterday was Halloween, and in Edmonton Strathcona, we welcomed children yelling trick or treat, rewarding them with sweet treats. It's a good thing they'll have dental care. But trick-or-treating season didn't end last night. For 2 million seniors, the tricks just keep coming. In 2012, Stephen Harper announced his plan to change the age eligibility for old age security and the guaranteed income supplement from 65 to 67, and Canadians were outraged. So seeing an opportunity, no doubt, the government restored the age of eligibility for old age security and GST back to 65. But with this government, there's always a trick. This year, their 10% increase for OAS, an overdue and necessary increase, became a trick when, surprise, the government decided to leave some seniors out. This increase only goes to seniors aged 75 and older. Seniors aged 65 to 74 are being left holding an empty bag. All seniors are facing the same costs. It's time to stop playing tricks on seniors. All seniors need an increase. All seniors deserve an increase.
L'honorable député de Saint-Jean.
The honourable member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, René Lévesque left us 35 years ago. The nationalization of electricity, the Charter of the French language, agricultural zoning, automobile insurance, the immigration agreement, the Ministry of the Environment, and so much more. What Quebec owes to René Lévesque and the Parti Québécois is enormous. But more than all these achievements, his greatest contribution is that he made us Quebecers. Before René Lévesque, we were French Canadians. Thanks to him, thanks to women and men like him, we have become Québécois. That is his greatest and most beautiful legacy. That is why Félix Leclerc said he was a liberator. He left this world 35 years ago, and whether we are federalists or whether we support independence, we are all his inheritors, and we all owe him a great deal. He was a great man.
The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, winter is coming, and Canadians are about to pay the true price of this tired, worn-down NDP Liberal coalition. Thanks to their carbon tax, everything has gotten more expensive, from groceries to gasoline to home heating. But the leader of the NDP talks out of both sides of his mouth. On October 24th, Conservatives moved a motion to remove the carbon tax from home heating and make life more affordable. What did the leader of the NDP and his colleagues do? They voted to keep the carbon tax, making it more expensive for Canadians. But then this past weekend, the NDP leader spoke from the other side of his mouth, demanding that the government remove GST from the price of home heating. He can't have it both ways. Canadians see through this hypocritical charade. They know that it's actions that matter, not words. By voting to make home heating more expensive and to support tripling the carbon tax, the NDP has made it clear they're a cold, costly coalition partner of this Liberal government that Canadians cannot afford.
The honourable member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, in Nova Scotia and here in Ontario, November is officially recognized as Lebanese Heritage Month, a time to celebrate the generations of cultural, economic, civic contributions of Lebanese Canadians. November holds great significance for Lebanese all over the world as Independence Day, Eid al-Istiqlal, is celebrated on the 22nd. In my own province, the Lebanese presence dates back to the 1800s. And in 2018, I was part of the provincial government that proclaimed November as Lebanese Heritage Month. Again, this year, celebrations will be held from Yarmouth to Halifax to Sydney. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to have introduced Bill C-268 to recognize Lebanese Heritage Month nationally and honor, share, and celebrate our culture. I'm equally proud to work with Senator Jane Cordy on Bill S-246 to do the same. I encourage all members to mark Lebanese Heritage Month in their communities, join our parliamentary friendship group, and support these important bills. Thank you.
Before I go on and I have your full attention, I just want to point out two little things, little housekeeping things. One is the rules state that you're not supposed to walk between the Speaker and whoever is enunciating or speaking in the House. Just a little bit of a courtesy thing there. And the other one is the SO31s are 60 seconds long. I just wanted to point that out. I wouldn't want to cut anybody's message off. Oral questions, question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
First of all, the Prime Minister inflated inflation with $500 million in inflationist policies. Then, inflationist taxes that make the production of our goods and services even more expensive. And now, the deficit is increasing. Interest rates, so every single decision makes things worse. Canadians keep saying, stop increasing taxes, stop inflationist deficits, stop spending. When will the Prime Minister finally listen and stop? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, what I hear from Canadians is that they are concerned with the cost of living, with the cost of sending their children to the dentist, and the cost of rent if they have low income. And that is the reason for which we have gone forward with tangible measures in order to help Canadians. The Conservatives, however, have chosen to be against dental care for children. They choose to be against direct help for low-income renters. If they really want to be here for Canadians, then they would support our plans to support Canadians.
Le chef de l'opposition.
But everything he does makes the problem worse. Right. It started with $500 billion of inflationary deficits. More money chasing fewer goods equals higher prices. Then he brought in more inflationary taxes with the help of his costly coalition partners. They want to triple that tax. And now his deficits are driving up interest rates faster than at any time in 30 years. There's really one thing for him to do. Stop. Stop the inflationary taxes. Stop the inflationary deficits. Stop driving up the cost of living. Will he do the honourable thing, the compassionate thing, and stop taxing Canadians?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the investments we made during the pandemic to support seniors, to support young people, to support workers, to support small businesses, not only helped people significantly through the difficult years of the pandemic, but also ensured that our economy came roaring back faster than many other economies around the world. That's why we've continued to be there to support Canadians, not just because it's the nice thing to do, but also because it's the way to ensure that our economy grows in the best possible ways for all Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He claimed he had to add that $500 billion of debt because of COVID, but according to his own parliamentary budget officer, 40% of the new debt he added in the last 2 years alone had nothing whatsoever to do with COVID. This Prime Minister has added more debt than all previous Prime Ministers combined, saying that low interest rates would make it a costless proposition. Well, now we learn from Desjardins Banking that Canadians will spend more on debt interest on the federal debt next year, $50 billion, than we typically spend on health care transfers to the provinces. Wow. Why is he getting the money to bankers and bondholders instead of doctors and nurses?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our investments to support Canadians through the pandemic, our investments to support them right now with the GST credit that's going to help families with hundreds of dollars at a moment they need them, support low-income families pay for rent, support low-income families with help for dental. These are the things that are going to make a difference right now in the way we move forward. While the Conservatives talk about cuts to EI, cuts to pensions, and taking money away from Canadians by ending the climate action incentives that has most Canadians far better off with the investments we're making to fight climate change.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, it kind of reminds me, he's paying higher taxes will make people better off. Well, we found out from the parliamentary budget officer that wasn't true. And then he said that he would take on all the debt so that Canadians wouldn't have to. Remember that? Well, not only are they stuck with a higher national debt with more interest payments, but now their personal debts are going up. According to Equifax, the average Canadian household has more credit card debt than at any time in Canadian history, and the Prime Minister's inflationary policies are driving up interest rates on those costs. So if he really took on all that debt so that Canadians wouldn't have to, who's going to pay those Canadians' credit card bills?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The Leader of the Opposition were truly concerned about the cost of living for Canadians, he would be supporting our measure to support families with the cost of dental care for their kids. They'd help with our support on low-income renters as well. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm also astonished to hear that the Leader of the Opposition has been silent on the matter of the use of the notwithstanding clause preemptively to suspend people's fundamental rights and freedoms. I call on the Leader of the Opposition to stand up for workers' rights, to defend people's rights and freedoms, and condemn the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause to suspend workers' rights.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
No one has done more to attack workers' rights than the Prime Minister, who eats up their paychecks with 40-year highs in inflation. To $54 million for the Arrive scam app, an app we didn't need, that didn't work, that sent 10,000 people wrongly into quarantine, and that could have been designed for $250,000 in a weekend, but took $54 million instead. Some of the companies the Prime Minister said got the money said they never received it. It's time for the truth. Will the Prime Minister support our motion to call in the auditors?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know we're all astonished to hear the Leader of the Opposition miss an opportunity to stand up for the rights and freedoms of workers. That is something that we expect him to continue to do alongside all of us in the House in condemning the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause. But on top of that, he's also talking about cuts to EI. When he criticizes us for being there and ensuring that EI and CPP is there for workers into the future, he calls that tax increases. We're going to be there to support people paying EI. We're going to be there to support people with their pensions. We're going to be there for dental and rental. He is not.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, our hospitals have reached a breaking point. This is the message from the group of emergency service heads of Quebec this morning. They wrote that because of a lack of resources, emergency rooms are no longer able to treat people whose clinical condition is unstable or even fatal. At the same time, the Toronto Star revealed that the Prime Minister is plotting to break up the common front of Quebec and the provinces, which are calling for an increase in health transfers. He wants to divide them, to force them to give up $27 billion. Does he not realise that this is really the worst time to be scheming to deprive our hospitals of $28 billion? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, all Canadians deserve a functioning healthcare system with doctors and nurses who will treat them. A system that offers mental health, mental care for those who need it. However, we see that our current systems are facing huge difficulties, and that is the reason for which we will be here with more money. It's not only more money, it's what we want to see are better results for Canadians and Quebecers, and that is the reason why we would like to work with provinces to deliver best results possible for all Canadians. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, we have a Prime Minister who is seeking to divide with the known intention of isolating Quebec. He wants to negotiate an agreement on his own terms with weaker split provinces, and then he wants to go to the Premier of Quebec last. Present him with the fait accompli and tell him, well, that's the deal, you sign or be damned. Mr. Speaker, I see you hesitating. You're asking yourself, is he talking about the Prime Minister with the health transfers, or is he talking about his father, Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, during the Night of the Long Knives? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, let us put aside partisanship just for 1 minute. We can all agree that Canadians deserve the best healthcare possible. They deserve to have best access to family physicians, to mental health services, And we are here to work with provinces. But for this, we need tangible results. We can't simply just put more money in a system that doesn't work. We can't throw money at it. We have to improve the system. And that is why we are ready to work with Quebec and every single province and every single territory. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, at the weekend, the Minister for the Environment begged the oil companies to take their record profits and invest them in renewable energy. Instead of begging, perhaps the Minister should first stop taking billions of public money from them. According to a report, apart from Japan, Canada is the G20 country that finances and funds oil companies the most, and the Liberals have promised to end fossil fuel subsidies by 2023. As far as I know, that's 2 months away. Do the Liberals have a contingency plan to end subsidies, or was it just lip service? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as we have always said, we will put an end to inefficient fossil fuel subsidies by the end of 2023. That is something that we promised for 2025, but we brought it forward because we understand that this is very important. We will do so whilst investing in a greener transition, in decarbonisation of our industries, to create good jobs for our workers in a wide variety of industries, because we know that Canadians want better green technologies for the future.
For Elmwood Trans-Kuna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that people are struggling right now with the cost of housing and the cost of groceries. We know that they're struggling with the cost of heating their homes and that those prices continue to go up. We've tried in this place to work with Conservatives to take the GST off of home heating. It's a long-standing NEP position, but they would rather put their fundraising against the climate ahead of reducing costs for Canadians in this difficult time. So will the Liberals do the right thing and work with us to take GST off of home heating now in the fall before people have to keep paying higher and higher prices?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when we brought in a price on pollution that applies in provinces across this country, not all of them, but many of them, we know that we return more money to average families to help with the cost of paying their bills than the price on pollution costs them. That's why we are going to continue to step up with affordability measures for families, whether it is the climate action incentive that lands in their bank accounts 4 times a year, or whether it's the GST credit return that's coming to them in the coming days, or whether it's support for rental and dental. We will continue to be there for Canadians.
Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Prime Minister needs to stop misleading the House. The 7 years of inflationary spending have pushed a record number of Canadians from grocery stores to food banks. Now data shows that 88% of Canadians say it is more difficult to buy food to feed their own households. A staggering 54% of Canadians are cutting back on grocery shopping altogether. Canadians can't keep up, and now they are barely hanging on. Will the HoC coalition stop their inflationary spending and cancel their plan to triple taxes on groceries?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, people across the world have been going through difficult economic times, and it is no exception here in Canada. Canadians are struggling to make ends meet. The responsible thing to do, Mr. Speaker, is to provide targeted supports to Canadians who need it the most at a time when they need it the most. And that means providing dental supports to 500,000 kids, to make sure that we have a $500 check for rental supports, and to make sure that we're able to double the GST. What's irresponsible, Mr. Speaker, is misleading Canadians, mischaracterizing the source of inflation, telling Canadians they're on their own. That's the Conservative plan. We have the backs of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
What's irresponsible is that they gave wage subsidies to wealthy corporations that were able to pay their own dividends. What's irresponsible was paying $54 million on an Arrive scam app that should have cost $250,000. Now, let's get this straight. Liberals are the arsonists of this inflationary fire. More Canadians today and more newcomers want to leave Canada because they just can't afford it anymore. Canadians can't afford this costly coalition any longer. Will they stop their inflationary spending and stop raising taxes on hardworking Canadians? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are experts at revisionist history, and let us go back to 2020 when this government was faced with the worst pandemic in 100 years. This government made historic investments in our communities, in our provinces, in our businesses and Canadians. And what did the former Bank of Canada, Stephen Poloz, say about those investments, Mr. Speaker, after his analysis of that spending? In fact, what the stimulus did was to keep the economy from going into a deep hole in which we would have experienced persistent deflation. The Conservatives don't like it, Mr. Speaker, but those are the facts.
The Honourable Member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Once upon a time, many Canadians trusted the Liberals that interest rates would stay low. Many purchased homes based on this promise. This Prime Minister then added more debt than all other Prime Ministers combined. Even Liberals like Mike Carney have said that inflation is principally a domestic story. For many Canadians, inflation is not a story. It is a nightmare. And some mortgage payments have risen by over $2,000 a month. Will these Liberals end in this inflationary nightmare and commit to cancelling their plan to raise taxes?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, time and time again, the Conservatives have demonstrated that they don't care about supporting low-income Canadians and Canadians who are facing the high cost of living. When it comes to initiatives such as lowering taxes for the middle class or the Canada Child Benefit, or when it comes to childcare, Mr. Speaker, who for families across the country are saving up to 50% in fees, that's thousands of dollars in their pocket every year. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have voted against it time and again. We know where we stand, and we stand with Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, those benefits will never reach the average Canadian. These Liberals can help Canadians today by getting their spending and taxes under control. People on fixed incomes like seniors, veterans, and those on disability are really suffering. Many have written to me saying that they can barely afford food to eat. 20% of them are skipping meals to save money, and people are resorting to food banks. Will this Prime Minister commit to giving Canadians a break and cancel his plan to raise taxes?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know about the Conservative members, but I speak to real Canadians every single day. And today in Ontario, 86% of childcare centres have signed on to the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Agreement. And I've heard from families who are saving thousands of dollars. In fact, last week, a woman in Toronto contacted me to say $4,000 is what her family is getting back, dating back to April 1st. $4,000, Mr. Speaker, that's a lot of money in people's pockets that's going to help them with the high cost of living. And, Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to be there delivering real measures for real Canadians every single day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Charles-Bourleux-Saint-Charles, Mr. Speaker. Equifax is saying that the non-mortgage debt rate is over $21,000. The company also reports that more than half of Canadians worry about not being able to pay their monthly bills. In the last 2 years, this Prime Minister has spent over $200 billion on expenses that had nothing to do with the pandemic. $200 billion. That's the equivalent of federal taxes for 27 million middle-class Canadians. This way, once again, can he commit to stop his inflationary spending and stop raising taxes on Canadians? They've had enough. The Honourable Minister for Canadian Heritage. We have to ask who wrote my colleague's question, because he's just copying the message from web giants. It's as if the web giants are asking his questions. If he was truly interested in what's happening in Canada, he would be worried for our democracy, for regional media, for national media, for independent news. But instead of that, he's just repeating the message from Facebook and other web giants instead of defending Canadians. The Honourable Member for Charles-Bourleux-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, how can my colleague explain that since taking office in 2015, the Prime Minister has increased the country's debt to over $1 trillion? Desjardins says that Canadian taxpayers will have to pay $49.5 billion this year alone in interest on that debt. How did we get there? With inexplicable spending by the Prime Minister, for example, for giving two multi-million-dollar loans to the Irving family, giving $50 million to MasterCard, giving $12 million to Loblaws for refrigerator purchases. These are just a few of many examples. Will the Prime Minister finally commit to stop the spending spree that only increases the debt and burden on Canadians? The Honourable Minister. I'll give you some more examples, Mr. Speaker. What is happening with regards to culture? What is happening with regards to our artists and creators? And instead of helping culture and voting for Bill C-11, they're blocking it in the Senate. They're blocking it in the Senate. So once again, instead of defending our culture, our TV, our music, and our TV shows, what are they doing? They are just spreading what web giants want them to spread. For once, instead of repeating messages, let's have a spine and finally defend Canadians. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. With 5 days to go before COP27, we learned that Canada continues to pour public money into the fossil fuel industry. It is the second worst country in the G20, according to Oil Change International. Worse than Russia, imagine that. This government has invested $8.5 billion a year between 2019 and 2021, so how are the other countries supposed to react to COP27 when they hear Canada making nice speeches when it is the second worst dunce in the G20? And Mr. Speaker, what do you call someone who says one thing and does the opposite? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Natural Resources. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has committed to eliminating public funding of fossil fuels by the end of 2023, and we will reduce this by the end of 2023 to confirm we must face climate change. We must implement a plan to fight climate change and to grow an economy that will be prosperous, and of course, we will work together in this fight. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Since 2009, Canada has promised to stop subsidising fossil fuels. 13 years later, nothing has changed, and that is a reason for which we've had enough of promises without action. This government promised to stop subsidising fossil fuels by 2023. But 2023, hey, it's 2 months away, 61 days to go. If it intends to fulfil its promise, then it must be quite far advanced. It must have a great plan. At the COP27, will the Minister be able to announce that fossil fuel subsidies are over and that this is not just an empty promise? Will it finally be a reality?
Secretary to the Environment Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to agree with the Honourable Member that we need to go further and faster on fossil fuel subsidies on our journey to net zero by 2050. And, Mr. Speaker, we're doing exactly that. We're capping emissions from the fossil fuel sector. We're implementing a clean fuel standard. We're investing in carbon capture, Mr. Speaker, and we will be eliminating inefficient fossil fuel subsidies by 2023, 2 years in advance of the deadline, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Avignon-Métis-Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, it's going to be heavy at COP27. Canada will be making speeches on a green transition when it has just announced in Washington that it wants to accelerate its oil and gas projects. The government will make speeches about protecting nature when it has just authorised 100,000 kilometres of oil drilling in a protected marine environment. It is going to make speeches about state responsibility when it just approved Baie du Nord. Mr. Speaker, do you remember when Stephen Harper boycotted the UN to open up a Tim Hortons? At this point, you have to wonder why this government isn't doing the same. They may as well. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, well, thank you to my colleague for that interesting question. As I said yesterday already, when she asked this question, we have implemented a plan to fight climate change that is perhaps the most detailed in the world. It is bold, it is aggressive, it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to ensure a prosperous and clean future for our children and our grandchildren, and we want to work together with our partners from the Bloc Québécois and with the NDP and, of course, the Conservatives.
Number for Calgary-Mindapur.
Mr. Speaker, the numbers are in. $2,400 per Canadian spent last year. That's $171,000 a minute. Yet 47% of Canadians feel they're in a worse economic position this year than last year. And 30% of Canadians, Mr. Speaker, feel that we are already in a recession. Canadians can't afford this costly coalition. So will this Liberal NDP coalition commit to no inflationary spending?
Great question. The Honourable Minister of tourism.
Mr. Speaker, let's just look at the record. When the Conservatives were in office, they did nothing to help the most vulnerable Canadians. It is this government that has introduced the Canada Child Benefit, doubling the GST, a $500 top-up on housing supports, cutting childcare fees in half, providing dental care to 500,000 kids. Mr. Speaker, it's the responsible thing. It's targeted. That's our job as a government. We are doing our job.
Here, here. Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Speaker, we're opposed to all wasteful spending. That includes $6,000 for a hotel room, $12,000 for groceries in a single month, $54 million for a single application. Yet 53% of Canadians are worried we're going to enter a recession next year. Why is that, Mr. Speaker? Inflationary spending. So will this Liberal NDP coalition commit to stopping inflationary spending?
Here, here. The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Conservatives don't like to admit it, but we're actually coming out of a global pandemic, one of the most difficult periods of time that Canadians have gone through in almost a century. Mr. Speaker, when we talk about extraordinary spending, it's because we supported 9 million Canadians on the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. It's because we supported thousands of businesses through the CEBA, and it's because we supported millions of people through the Canada Emergency Wage supports, Mr. Speaker. That's what we did. That was necessary. It was important, and we made sure we were there for Canadians in their time of need. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. What was not necessary for the government was to take $200 billion of this $500 billion to spend on programs that had absolutely nothing to do with the COVID pandemic, Mr. Speaker. That is the reality of the matter. They hide, they divert in order to avoid telling the truth to Canadians. $500 billion, 40% of which was not for COVID. At the same time, $1.5 million Canadians had to go to food banks over 1 month. 20% of Canadians stated that they had to skip meals because they simply couldn't buy food. When will they stop wasteful spending? The Honourable Minister. When we look at the facts, during the pandemic, the worst pandemic we've seen in over 100 years, this House, this government, made the decision to support Canadians, to support our provinces, our territories, our constituencies, and businesses. Stephen Poloz, former Bank of Canada governor, said this allowed the economy to avoid a precipice where we would have known a persistent deflation, a contraction of the economy. The Conservatives don't want to admit it. Those are facts.
The honourable member from Mégantic-L'Érable. The future Prime Minister said that the inflation is mostly caused by domestic issues here in Canada. And what we're saying, that they sent checks to prisoners. They sent CERB checks to public servants and also thousands to We Charity members. $54 million for ArriveCan, a $6,000 suite for the PM. And when will they stop their wasteful spending? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the new economic action plan for them is cutting EI benefits, cutting the pension plan, cutting childcare benefits, cutting climate change action, and that's what they're proposing. Chop, chop, chop. Every of these measures will take money from Canadians' pockets. It's irresponsible. That's their typical Conservative austerity, and that's not our plan. Is to invest in Canadians.
Mr. Speaker, people in Canada are struggling with their mental health, and accessing help is almost impossible. Yesterday, a report found almost all Canadian workers have experienced mental distress, and for many, it's only getting worse. Years ago, this government said it would amend the Canada Labour Code to protect workers, but the Liberals have failed to follow through, just like they haven't delivered on promised new funding for mental health supports. When will the government finally do what's right by delivering on their promises to protect the mental health of workers?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to say that very soon we will be talking about a mental health policy that will also include the right to disconnect The world of work has changed so much over the past few years, but particularly during the age of COVID. And we recognize that workers do have a right to disconnect from their employer and enjoy a work-life balance. I look forward to working with members in this House to make sure to make that a reality for workers in this country. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Last Saturday, I joined hundreds of protesters in London demanding justice for Mahsa Amini. One local activist stated, "We are not going to back down. This is the point of no return." The government needs to step up and support the brave women and men fighting for women's rights in Iran. But to date, there isn't a single Iranian official targeted by Magnitsky sanctions to hold those committing human rights violations accountable. When will this government start taking concrete actions and use specific sanctions to support Iranians?
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with my colleague. Obviously, what is happening in Iran is completely unacceptable. That's why we're taking strong measures against the Iranian regime, which includes sanctions against the Iranian regime. Again, yesterday I announced strong sanctions, which also include isolating Iran at the UN Human Rights Council, particularly for women's rights. Now, what we are going to do is announce more sanctions. We'll work on the implementation of sanctions. We've announced more funding to do so, and I look forward to working with her on this. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cloverdale Langley City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the pandemic, our government waived interest on Canada student loans and Canada apprentice loans for 2 years. We did this because we knew young people were amongst the hardest hit by job losses. As we look toward the future, we know that student loan repayment continues to be a top concern for many Canadians, especially those with low or modest incomes. That's why the Honourable Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion is taking action to make loan repayment more flexible and affordable. Can the Minister please share with this House more details about the change being implemented today?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, the member from my hometown of Cloverdale Langley City, for his tireless work on behalf of his constituents and all Canadians. We believe that no one should be deterred from pursuing an education because of unaffordable interest costs, and that's why, effective today, Mr. Speaker, graduates will not have to start repaying their federal loans until they earn at least $40,000 per year, and maximum payments will also be lowered from 20% to 10% of household income. This will support an estimated 180,000 borrowers each year.
For Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Speaker, 51% of Canadians are struggling to afford food, and those who can't cut back any further are being driven to their local food banks. But the government doesn't care. They're too busy blowing money on $7,000 a night hotel rooms or $54 million on a Arrive scam. To pay for their scandals and secret backroom deals with the NDP, they want to raise taxes, further driving up the cost of basic necessities like food. Canadians can't afford this costly coalition. Will the Liberals end their inflationary spending?
Here, here. The Honourable Minister for... The Honourable Minister.
For the question, Mr. Speaker, there's no point of bringing politics into that. Every member of this House wants to make life more affordable for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. That's what we did, and I remind my colleague, like I said earlier this week, back in May, Mr. Speaker, I wrote to the Competition Bureau to ask them to do all the tools they have at their disposal to make sure there was no unlawful practice in the grocery market in Canada. More recently, Mr. Speaker, I asked them to launch an investigation, and I called the CEOs of a number of these food chains to make their part to help Canadians. Everyone needs to make their part to help Canadians in this time.
The Honourable Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, they say they want to reduce inflation, but everything they're doing is going in the wrong direction. The Liberals are piling up more debt, and taxpayers can't keep up. When the PM travels abroad, he stays in a $6,000 a night hotel. The Arrive Can scam cost $54 million and handed millions to Liberal insiders. The cost of the administrative state has exploded. The debt last year was $90 billion. The Liberals have racked up more debt than all Canadian governments combined. When will this Liberal government stop, reverse course, and bring down prices for Canadians and stop their inflationary spending?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've been been asking the Conservatives to put a plan on the table for affordability, and we have it. It's hot off the presses. It's the new Conservative Economic Action Plan, Mr. Speaker. Cut employment insurance benefits, cut Canadian pension plan, cut child care benefits, cut climate action checks, and each one of these planks in their plan, Mr. Speaker, pulls more money out of the pockets of Canadians to give to the wealthiest. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what kind of plan they have, but our plan focuses on those Canadians who need it the most, when they need it the most. That's responsible government. That's our plan.
Honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians can't afford this costly Liberal NDP coalition. Now, these Liberals have showered Liberal friends like Frank Bayliss with $237 million in COVID contracts. They gave $28 million to Liberal donor Pierre Gay off the Roxon Road, and they shoveled over $54 million to a couple of guys sitting down in their basement that created the ArriveCan app that should have been built for under $250,000. So why is it that Liberal insiders under this Prime Minister always get rich, while regular Canadians have to pay more for heating, eating, and fuel?
The Honourable Minister for Rural Development.
Mr. Speaker, I tell you what we can't afford. We can't afford not to do something on climate change. I want to put some faces on not acting on climate change now. I want to talk about Norm, who saw his wife washed out to sea. I want to talk about Amy and her daughter, who were literally ran from their house without shoes on their feet. I want to talk about Smokey, who was pulled from the ocean by his brother. I want to talk about Brian Button, who has had to have sit-down conversations with over 100 homeowners to tell them that their homes are destroyed and condemned, and there's more on that list. I want to talk about the people in Burgeo and Burnt Islands and Blanc, Foxwoods, Marguerite.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if that minister actually cared about those Canadians, he'd make life more affordable by cutting off the carbon tax. You know what? Right now, we just continue to prove that this Liberal NDP coalition is out of touch with Canadians, and Canadians are out of patience with this government. Canadians are suffering from the Liberal-induced inflationary crisis, while their Liberal friends are rolling in cash. Now, if the NDP and Liberals truly cared about average Canadians, they wouldn't have voted to triple the carbon tax. So what does this Liberal NDP coalition have to say to Canadians who are skipping meals and using food banks, well, because of this government's...
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to continue my narrative because I was talking about Canadians' lives. That's what was impacted by us not acting on climate change and not acting on climate change now. I've seen people go through the rubble looking for their parents' urns of ashes. I've seen people looking for memorabilia.
Okay, the Honourable Minister from the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about Canadians' lives. I'm talking about the lives of people who have lost their homes, their belongings, their memorabilia, everything that they've lost because we have to do something on climate change. We have to do something now. We've seen the hurricanes in the Atlantic. We've seen forest fires. We've seen drought. The cost of inaction is only going to get worse. I hope nobody has to stand up in this House and talk about a life lost in their riding because of inaction on climate change. Everybody needs to act on this, and we need to act on now.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, the Rouleau Commission has learned that even before the truck convoy came to Ottawa, the government was planning to insult the occupants in an effort to scorn them. Text messages between Liberal employees reveal that this was strategic. They wanted to give interviews about the extreme elements of the convoy to make them look bad, and they even thought it would bring out the crazies. They said. 2 days later, the Prime Minister insulted the convoy, and the police confirmed that this fueled the crisis. Does the government realize how dangerous and deeply irresponsible its strategy was? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, we invoked the Emergencies Act because this was an unprecedented situation. It was dangerous for workers, for families, for youth, and that is why we worked together with police services. It was a necessary decision, and now we're going to collaborate with the Commission because transparency is an important component of this exercise. Now, thank you. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, do you know what the worst part is? When they saw the convoy of trucks driving towards Ottawa, they didn't plan anything to stop them from besieging the city. They didn't plan to get them out either. They developed a calm strategy to escalate the crisis because they thought they were scoring political points. Not only did they let the protesters take hold of the city of Ottawa, but then their strategy created more than 3 weeks of tension, Mr. Speaker. How can the minister justify his strategy to the people who were held captive in their own city? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the beginning of this illegal blockade, the government managed the resources and the RCMP to help the police force here in Ottawa and help other operations across the country. It was an unprecedented situation, and the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act was one that was necessary to help Canadians who were impacted by this unprecedented situation. Thank you.
Royal.
Mr. Speaker, under this government's soft on crime agenda, violent crime has risen by 32%. But now there's more devastating news for victims and survivors. Last Friday, in a 5-4 split decision, the Supreme Court struck down the legal requirement that all sex offenders be listed in the National Sex Offender Registry. Now, this is the part where the minister stands up and says he's studying the decision. But what Canadians and victims want to hear is a clear commitment from this government that all sex offenders will be listed in the National Sex Offender Registry. Will the minister make that commitment?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for his question on this important issue. Safety is a priority for our government, Mr. Speaker, and certainly our hearts go out to victims of sexual assault and sexual violence. The registry was passed by a government, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court of Canada found 2 provisions in that registry to be unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, we are going to look at that decision. We're going to look at the options responsibly and move forward from there. But victims will always be, and the safety of Canadians will always be, our priorities in this matter.
The Honourable Member for Peterborough-Kawartha.
Mr. Speaker, since this Prime Minister took office and implemented his soft on crime policy, violent crime in Canada has risen 32%. Wow. 60% of Canadians say they've seen an increase in crime in their community. Families are afraid to take their children downtown. Businesses who are barely hanging on are seeing a decrease in customers because Canadians are choosing to stay home and feel safe. So will this Prime Minister do his job and punish violent criminals and protect innocent Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear, and I hope all members will share the sentiment that we have to do better when it comes to protecting our communities. That's why I'm proud of the work that this government is doing in launching a national handgun freeze. I'm proud of the fact that we have launched a national ban on assault-style rifles. I'm proud of the fact, Mr. Speaker, that we've launched a $250 million fund to prevent gun crime from occurring in the first place. What have the Conservatives done? They have filibustered at every single stage, blocking important resources for law enforcement and smart, sensible policy. They should come on side and do right by all of the victims and the survivors with whom we meet with far too often, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this Sunday during Halloween festivities in Vancouver, 5 people were stabbed. The drug trafficking epidemic continues to get worse in British Columbia. Property crime is skyrocketing and small businesses are losing money because people don't feel safe going to visit those businesses. Across BC, Mr. Speaker, there is a pervading sense of lawlessness that is hurting the social fabric of our communities. So my question to the minister today is very simple. When will this government finally deal with prolific offenders and end their soft on crime approach?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, and I know that this is a priority not just to British Columbians, but indeed to all Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recently at a meeting of Justice and Public Security Ministers for the provinces, the territories, and the federal government, we have committed to looking at the question of prolific offenders and what to do. Mr. Speaker, we're working with our provincial partners in order to find a solution. In all cases, Mr. Speaker, keeping Canadians safe is our first priority.
The Honourable Member for Marc Aurel Fortin. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian government has made a commitment to reach reasonable collective agreements for taxpayers that also offers fair scenarios for employees with provisions that reflect today's labour market. The President of the Treasury Board, can she inform the House about the new agreement that has just been reached? The Honourable Minister. Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleague for his important question and also for his contribution to his community. Good news, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to share that after 1 year of negotiations, the Canadian government reached an agreement in principle with the Association of Canadian Financial Officer Controllers, and both parties negotiated in good faith. We reached a fair deal for employees and for taxpayers. I'd like to thank both parties for this winning conclusion. Thank you.
Prince George Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Mr. Speaker, in Dawson City, Yukon, the cost of furnace oil has gone up almost 61% since last year thanks to liberal inflation and carbon tax. Families will now have to pay over $7,600 to heat their homes. Yukoners shouldn't have to decide between staying warm or buying groceries, all while Liberals have not met a single environmental target. They have a tax plan, everybody. We know that, not an environmental plan. Why won't the Liberals give Yukoners a break and cut the carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly affordability is extremely important. We've taken significant steps, including allocating $250 million for home heating oil replacements with greener alternatives, doubling the GST tax credit. It's also the case, no matter what the Conservatives attempt to mislead, that 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back in the rebate from the carbon tax than what they pay. But, Mr. Speaker, it also bears stating that Conservatives also misled Canadians during the recent general election when they campaigned on putting in place a carbon tax. Given that position, the position that they're taking today, each Conservative member in this chamber is in fact breaking a promise they made to the constituents that sent them here. Mr. Speaker, how can Canadians believe
The Honourable Member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, massive Liberal deficits have caused a 40-year high inflation, resulting in major increases in the cost of living. I have many seniors in my riding, like Kathy, who at 68 years of age has had to go back to work in order to pay for utilities, food, and make her mortgage payments. As well, a disabled constituent reached out to me by email this weekend, indicating she's down to 1 meal per day and, in her words, is contemplating applying for assisted death instead of starving to death. What is the government doing for 65 to 74-year-olds, and will the Liberals stop punishing them and cancel all tax increases on gas, groceries, and home heating?
Hear, hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Seniors.
If I won't take any lessons from the party opposite, whose plan for seniors was to raise the age of retirement to 67, or the attack on their pensions, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we restored that age back to 65. Mr. Speaker, we enhanced the CPP. Mr. Speaker, we increased the guaranteed income supplement that has, Mr. Speaker, lifted thousands of seniors out of poverty. Mr. Speaker, we also increased the OAS by 10%. We're delivering on doubling the GST credit, Mr. Speaker, and with the payments that are going to be going out this Friday. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to deliver for all Canadians, including seniors and those living with disabilities. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Liselette, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, because of this government's endless spending, inflation keeps going up, and Quebec families are having to deal with higher and higher bills. When the government should have been prudent in recent years, it has continued to spend lavishly. One example, the costly Arrive Can app, on which $54 million was spent, and which could have been created in one weekend for $250,000. Imagine the difference between this. Will this government do the right thing and allow the Auditor General to get to the bottom of this waste? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, my colleague is talking about Quebec families. Quebec families and what they need. What they need is support from the government, whether it's help for their children, for daycare, or for workers, all these things that the Canadian government has done. And I'm wondering, which of these things would they cut? They have this chop, chop, chop strategy. Where would they cut?
The Honourable Member for Etobicoke Centre.
Recently, the Minister of International Development and I were in Ukraine to show Canada's steadfast support, but also to learn what more Canada can do to help. We were there one day after Russian missile strikes targeting civilians across the country. During our visit, the Minister and I each received the shirt that I'm wearing here today. Everyone we met with, Speaker, told us that after Russia's missile strikes, Ukrainians are more determined than ever to win this war decisively. And many also asked whether we would be there until the end, until Ukraine wins this war. Could the Minister share with Canadians the importance of this message, and will Canada stand with the Ukrainian people until they win?
Good question.
All Minister.
During our visit to Lviv, Ukraine, we had the opportunity to meet with youth from the Ukrainian Leadership Academy, and one thing is clear. Young people have contributed to Ukraine's resistance in the face of Putin's illegal war. These courageous students launched their own campaign called Heroes Among Us. They're telling the stories of those ordinary people standing determined in the defense of Ukraine. It's inspiring to see the resilience and determination, and Canada will stand firm in our support for all Ukrainians. Slava Ukraini.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
The outdated diesel power plant in Sanagayak resulted in the community without power for 4 days at temperatures dipped to minus 17 degrees. Not only do the power plants harm the environment, they are unreliable and outdated. This government continues to neglect the needs of communities, and they must invest in projects such as the Kivalliq Hydrolink. When will this government help Nunavut transition to reliable power solutions so people don't go without basic necessities?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for that very important question. Concerning the first part of the question with the power outage, I will speak to my team at the end of this meeting and make sure we get the details and see what our role is. We have a very good relationship with the government of Nunavut, and we're very proud to support the Kivalliq community, the government of Nunavut, on the Kivalliq fiber optic line that we are working on in partnership with all of the partners. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians have been shocked by allegations of political interference into an RCMP investigation. They want to know that the organizations that are protecting them aren't serving a political agenda. But the archaic language of the RCMP Act is a recipe for disaster. It needs to be fixed. Today, I called on new measures to clarify what directions the Minister of Public Safety can issue to the RCMP and for them to be issued in writing. We need to see more accountability. Will the Liberals support my proposal to help restore public trust in our institutions?
Hear, hear. Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, first I welcome the opportunity to work with my honourable colleague on his private member's bill, which he put forward this morning. In the meantime, I do want to update this chamber that my mandate calls for strengthened standards when it comes to use of force, strengthening the role of the Management Advisory Board, and finally Bill C-20, which will ensure that there is an opportunity for Canadians who have concerns with regards to the quality of service that they're getting from the RCMP and the CBSA for the first time, is legislation that I hope that we will pass with great haste, so that we can raise the bar on transparency, on accountability, and ensure the confidence of Canadians in their law enforcement institutions. Thank you.
Great, that's all the time we have for. Before we go on to I notice a couple of points of order. I just want to remind the honourable members that props are not allowed in the chamber, and referring to them is even more frowned upon. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of it. It was very subtle, but I'm not going to point anyone out. They know who they are. Please do not do that again. L'honorable député de Mégantic.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Point of order. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think that if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion. That the House remembers that almost 10 years ago, the worst rail tragedy in the history of Canada cost the lives of 39 people, and therefore the construction of the bypass rail should be concluded, and the government must approve the project as soon as possible. Thank you. All those opposed to the member moving the motion, please say nay.
D'accord.
All right. The House has heard the terms of the motion. Would all those who are opposed to the motion please say nay? Carried.
The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni is rising on a point of order.
There have been consultations, and I hope that if you seek it, you will find consent for the following motion. I move that given that one, the mental health of Canadians has been negatively impacted by the pandemic, two, economic conditions are exacerbating financial barriers to mental health supports, and three, that our public healthcare system is under immense strain. The House call upon the government to put into place a Canada mental health transfer without delay.
Hear, hear. All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. Nay, I'm afraid we don't have unanimous consent. That's all. Orders of the day.
Ordre amenant du gouvernement, travaux des subsides.
Business of supply.
Opposition motion on the ArriveCan application performance audit, standing in the name of Mr. Poilievre.
Resuming debate. Before we resume debate, I want everybody to say shh. Very good. Now we'll resume debate. The honourable member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, who has 5 minutes left in her speech. Oh, no. Sorry. 1 second. We'll just get everything straightened out here.
Yeah.
Good. Now that the chair has been briefed on what happened. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's somewhat disappointing in the sense that the Conservatives continue to not come to the realization that what's happening around the world is in fact quite serious in regards to inflation. You have